Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Scyushi, and we are back as more Trove, and this is going to kind of be a video that I should have been doing on the regular over the many years, where we are essentially going to briefly touch upon every patch that happened last year. This will be a good way that those of you that might be returning to the game could end up getting caught up with everything. But then in general, I just thought it would be kind of interesting as kind of a year-end review. I wanted to have this ready for the end of 2024, but I just got so busy with real-life stuff. So, my New Year's resolution for 2025 is to kind of take things a bit slower and allow these types of videos to go through their process rather than just trying to rush it out as soon as possible. And I've been really enjoying it. So anyways, before we get started with all of that, I would appreciate if you would hit the like. It helps me out very much. You could subscribe, but I know you've already all subscribed. So let's take a quick little peek. The first patch that I have set up for this year was actually the Crystal 5 and Gearcrafters update. So let me hop into the hub and we can talk about that. So what that essentially ended up doing was adding this huge crafters corner. And this is going to end up being the NPC that ends up giving us various resources that is ultimately going to be used in the gear crafting. Now, gear crafting is kind of interesting, and I feel like we haven't really seen its full potential yet, because as we'll talk about a little bit later, Mystic Gear is currently in the game, and in that patch notes, they teased craftable Mystic Gear. However, we haven't seen that yet, so maybe this year. Frankly speaking, I hope we get anything this year that's actually interesting, but yeah, this is kind of a bit of a controversial subject for a lot of players, because where you would normally be able to just go into Geode Surface and craft crystal gear outright, you can no longer do that. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's so much harder to get crystal gear now. And it's like, well, yeah, you can't get it immediately when you end up getting into Geode Surface. But on the other hand, it's so much more obtainable through other methods. Now, the main issue with this crafting table and everything is you basically gotta go all the way to the very end, get it completely maxed out, and then you're done. You don't have to touch this crafting table anymore. And in fact, it's more efficient to get gear out of the gear vaults, which we'll talk about momentarily. There's also the Gearcrafter Terminus, which this thing sucks. Like, it's just got really bad return for the amount of resources that it costs to upgrade it. And you can't even max it out anyway. And I don't know. I just never bothered with it because it's like, okay, who cares? And then again, this guy just sells items for that. So instead of actually trying to craft crystal gear, we'll go to D9, because we'll talk about difficulties being renamed later in this video as well. But yeah, we basically go to Forbidden Spires because there's so many more elite mobs here that it's actually one of the most efficient biomes in the game for grinding crystal gear, because every elite mob, nay, every dungeon as well, will end up giving you the Gearcrafters vaults as a drop. And this is a very strange box, because what it'll do is it'll rarely contain equipment based on your current class's power rank and gear crafting skill. So you have to have your gear crafting maxed out, and then depending on the power rank that you have on your character, you can get crystal gear as early as 20 KPR. Of course, you have to have 45 KPR in order to end up getting crystal 5 out of these boxes, but it's very rare. And I mean, generally speaking, you're just going to end up getting block element and stuff. The trick is, even when you're grinding the profession, you're going to have to open a certain amount of these boxes just to get the block element and the other resources that are required to max out the profession. But once you've maxed out the profession, you can basically just stockpile these boxes. And I've actually got a few thousand of them that I do plan on opening at some point, but I'm low-key really hoping that we're going to end up having a new class added to the game sometime this year, but we'll probably see our first update for Trove come March. So we'll see what happens with all of that, especially because, never mind this game's patch notes, real life patch notes, I'm going to be a dad in March. So moving on from that, the next patch was the Mystic Gear and U15 or D15 difficulty. Essentially, up to this point, all of these were called Uber Worlds, right? And I think Uber 1 started as soon as like Candyland, or maybe it was here. I don't even remember, honestly. But our difficulty ended up going to U10, U11, and then this new area, which is technically U12. This is the Long Shade. But the devs thought it would be a good idea to rename all of the difficulties, and instead they start at D0, which kind of weird, but whatever. And then they go all the way up to D15. A good way of translating the old Uber difficulties is you just end up adding 3 levels. So U10 is now D13. That's what somebody ended up telling me in chat like a couple months back. But yeah, I don't know. It's taking me a while to get used to the new difficulty terms. There are mods on PC that, regress the difficulty back to the old names. But I like to always try to keep things as even keel as I can for those of you that are on console players as well as PC, because on PC we've got a lot of quality of life mods and so on and so forth, but when it changes something that's like a core mechanic of like the world's literally being renamed, I just can't justify calling them Uber difficulty anymore, even though there was kind of a bit of a contrivance around it when the first update hit. So anyways, all the update essentially ended up doing was adding the long shade as the newest difficulty world. And what does this world actually entail? Nothing. There's nothing new about it. There's literally just like, it basically is just all the biomes in the game rotating 3 at a time, which is kind of weird. And then on top of that, the enemy scaling is really, really high. And there's also going to end up being these 5-star dungeons that are available and these new enemy types, as well as a couple new resources and stuff. But that's it. It's an absolute mess and I hate it. The long shade is myself and many other players' least favorite update of the game this year, or at least in 2024, because frankly speaking, it was supposed to be this big update that was going to add an end game. And then in a lot of ways, it actually went backwards. Because this is the new 5-star dungeon, and wouldn't you know it, it's not a wave defense dungeon like Sundered Uplands, because I'm suspect one of the developers forgot those dungeons existed. And so instead, this is just a traditional 5-star dungeon. So you see, it's literally going backwards. This is essentially geode surface, but less interesting. And the problem is that, as with most things in Trove, this is a parasitic update in that there are specific resources that you can only get out of this dungeon. On top of that, there's actually a new delve, but it's so ridiculously difficult and so boring just because it's the delves that I refuse to cover it. Frankly speaking, I can't cover it because I can't solo it. And if I can't solo it, I'm not gonna bother with it, trying to log in and try to find a group to end up doing the dungeon anytime I want. But yeah, anyways, suffice to say, the resources that you'll ultimately end up getting out of both this dungeon and the new delves, and of course, the new plants and other gathered resources that you can get out of the long shade, will ultimately end up giving you the items that are required in order to forge Crystal 5 gear, specifically Crystal 5, it has to be Crystal 5 gear, into Mystic. So you'll see that this is also another recycled update from the Mantle of Power. For those of you that don't know, Mantle of Power was probably Trove's most substantial update, but also its most controversial back in the day, because it was the update that added the gems. And with it, we got the Everdark, which was this new specific area to get your class gem abilities. But then on top of it, it was also where you would end up getting the Radiant gear, because I don't think Stellar Gear was in the game yet. I think Stellar Gear came after, if I'm not mistaken. But it was just this, there was all these different steps to getting like this high tiered gear. And it was really, really cool, really felt meaningful and impactful to the game. They also had the first ever early access patch of Trove, where you would buy into the update a week early, or you could just get the update for free like a week later, which I still personally think was a fantastic idea as far as their whole like pay to win stuff is concerned. Paying for early access is a fantastic idea for Trove that I really wish they would have explored, because it's not pay to win, it's just paying to play early. And I think that that's something that a lot of people would have been more interested in. Anyways, as you can see with my hundreds and hundreds of hours in the long shade and so on and so forth, I have just enough of this one resource to get 2 pieces of gear into Mystic, but I am missing all of these, and these are the items from the delves. Now there's a couple other methods that you can do to get these, but generally speaking, yeah, this update kind of sucks if I'm being perfectly honest. And it just kind of trivialized the gear crafting as a whole, because it was really exciting that we ended up just getting up to Crystal 5, and it was ridiculously expensive to get Crystal 5, and then they kind of just shoehorned in Mystic gear for no good reason whatsoever. Now, there are some people that have gotten Mystic gear. The majority of them took advantage of an exploit that is no longer in the game. I mean, hell, I would have taken advantage of it if I got to it in time, but I didn't. Around this update is when something happened to the game that had slowed down the rest of the updates for Trove. This isn't part of the patch notes. This is the duping. So I haven't had a video specifically dedicated to talking about this because, frankly speaking, I didn't want to draw attention to it, but I have talked about it in live streams and in other videos because it's there. It's the white elephant in the room that we just have to address, which basically what ended up happening, I talked about this in a YouTube short just to give you guys a quick update on it all, but basically there was this one person that was cheating in the game for like years. I knew about them, devs knew about them. They finally decided to ban that individual. But unfortunately, they didn't have any contingency plans in place, and they also banned them just before the weekend. So they banned that player. They all left for the weekend. You know, they weren't in the office. And then that player just came back and started telling everybody how to dupe items. And so everyone just started going crazy over the weekend. And unfortunately, the devs just, I don't know, they kind of came back and were just gaslit by the whole situation, and they didn't have the balls to roll the servers back. I know that it would have pissed a lot of people off, but in the long run, it would have been so much better for them to just take the servers off, roll them back, and start banning people. And on top of that, just fix the issue. Because since then, they've kind of just been on the back foot the whole time, constantly trying to keep up with banning people, trying to keep up with finding solutions to the problem, while people just keep finding new ways to dupe things. It kind of sucks. They should have been more prepared for this, and they should have taken the servers a little bit more seriously. But who knows how much of it was their control? It might have been Gamigo saying, oh no, you're not taking the servers down, even though they ultimately would lose more money by keeping the servers dry and letting them die because of the duping. But anyways, it's been slowly getting more and more under control, but because of it, you gotta understand that the devs have been super preoccupied with it, and so we haven't really had many updates come out since then. You know, maybe we were supposed to be getting a new class, maybe even crafted Mystic gear, as the patch notes mentioned we would get. And I guarantee we will be getting higher tiered Mystic gear and Mystic gems, by the way. I don't know if that's going to be happening this year, but it's definitely going to end up happening. So then there was also, there was a new starting area. So I will actually go to this right now. I hope I don't get stuck in here. But yeah, out of nowhere, they just ended up overhauling the tutorial, and they basically retconned out all the Daughter of the Moon stuff. And, you know, I think that's good that they did that because, frankly speaking, the tutorial did need an overhaul. But the irony is that this tutorial still doesn't teach a lot of the very basic mechanics of the game. I was really excited at the idea that they were going to do an overhauled tutorial because I thought it was going to be an opportunity for them to kind of reevaluate what needs to be explained to new players. But unfortunately, my videos are still just far better at doing that because there's just so many little things that the game doesn't teach you, which is very strange. And wouldn't you know it, that's actually it. That's all we had for 2024. I know it doesn't seem like much because the potions update with the mantras and the mystic arts and all that stuff, that was 2023. There was the player titles 2023. Like there was a lot of things specifically with 2023 that came out that in a lot of ways I keep mixing up with 2024. But yeah, looking back, wow, these updates have been so slow and so small. They haven't really affected the game that much in a positive way. But I mean, again, fingers crossed that we're going to have better updates come out this year. More so, they need to get the duping under control so that they can start dedicating their time on it. Because unfortunately, we've talked about this before, but I figured now is a very important time to discuss the fact that Trove may be on its last leg. The updates that we've heard about was a new class teased at the early portion of 2024, but never ended up coming to fruition. One of the devs was talking about Mystic Gems being added to the game, which nobody wants. and Mystic Gear, which is also something that nobody asked for. So unfortunately, we've kind of got an old school Trove update system in place where the developer's ego doesn't seem to match what the players are actually wanting. Despite the fact that we ended up having a survey in 2024 where all of us kind of bombarded them with all the stuff that we actually want from the game, which I'm hoping is most people asking for new classes. Because in my opinion, the reason why I want new classes is because then power creep doesn't matter as much if we're getting constant new characters. And then on top of that, new characters are like the lifeblood of this game, in my opinion, that add so much gameplay value to it, because it's like, okay, you spend like 20, 30 bucks on the new pack, you get a class that ends up lasting you for weeks, if not months, depending on how interesting they are. But aside from all of that, Gamigo ended up having a post, I think this was in 2023 actually, where they legit just straight up said, once these games are not profitable enough, they're gonna shut them down. And I mean, I would hope that Trove gets sold off to another company, but if Gamigo was the one that bought it up in the first place, I don't know if we're going to see a better company buy it up. And in fact, the game just may end up dead, which is so discouraging because I've talked about this before. I will say it again. As much as you may judge Trove and say that it's bad or whatever, you got to consider how long did you play the game and enjoy the game before you started to think that it was bad. Furthermore, there is no competition out there for Minecraft. I think that it's pathetic as far as the gaming industry is concerned. It's shockingly bad that we don't have AAA quality Minecraft clones, or let alone a voxel MMO that's free to play. Like, that's crazy if you stop and think about what Trove is in the whole spectrum of what video games are. There's nothing quite like it. Not only is it a unique voxel MMO, it's not just voxel in style. It also has like all of this, all of this is player built. I built all of this myself, and this is our club world. This is our clan. And then on top of that, most MMOs don't have this level of verticality. That's another thing that I really appreciate about Trove. Or action combat. Most games are tab targeting, even the oh so popular Final Fantasy XIV. So suffice to say, I just wanted to kind of share the love at the end of it all, because I know that 2024 was a pretty lackluster year for patches, but I'm really hoping that going into 2025, we can start seeing some more come out. And I know that there's also an argument of discourse in the community saying, oh, well, what happened when Gamigo took charge? Oh, they've been doing so much worse. These updates suck. I beg to differ. I think that they've consistently had updates come out way more than Trine Worlds did. And at the very least, it's been pretty okay updates, frankly speaking. Like the Gearcrafter update is actually a huge update for the game's economy because it made gear like so much easier to obtain for new players. I still personally think that the Gearcrafter boxes should be tradable, or more particularly, you should be able to craft Crystal 4, Crystal 5 gear boxes, the same as we have for the Crystal rings, so that gear could finally be tradable. That would be awesome. But anyways, what was your favorite patch of this year or last year? I guess none, because there wasn't really much there, but fingers crossed we'll see something new. Until then, thanks for watching. Appreciate you watching. Hopefully you ended up enjoying, and if you did, like, subscribe, notification bell, all of that stuff. Have a wonderful day, everybody.